Welcome to Mystery Theater at 7. My name is Lisa Long. The story that I bring you today is called Innocence. It is about someone who helps a 6-year-old little girl find her way out of a room that she's been trapped in for 11 years. And here's part 1 of Innocence. Chapter 1, The Door. It was late afternoon on a Saturday. 6-year-old Faith was asleep on a makeshift bed, which consisted of 2 chairs on either end, with a cushioned table between them. Cradled in her hand was a doll. The dark room where she slept gave way to an old, clean white door opening into it. From the light just beyond the door, a young woman appeared by the name of Innocence. Her footsteps echoed in the room as she walked over to the bed where the little waif was asleep. As she leaned over her, she smiled and gently shook Faith. Her college ring slightly fell to one side as she shook her. "Wake up, little one, wake up." The dark room dawned with a hint of light as Faith stirred. At seeing Innocence, she uttered, "You're beautiful. Who are you?" Innocence, with joy in her eyes at having seen Faith awakened, replied, "I'm Innocence, and I'm here to take you home." Without releasing the doll from her hand, Faith rubbed her eyes that were offset by slightly darker pigmentations around them. "How did you get in?" she questioned as she yawned. "A door, sleepyhead," Innocence said in a very kind tone as she straightened up and made reference to the door behind them. Faith rubbed her eyes, sat up, and looked to where the door stood. Then she looked back at Innocence. "What door?" she asked as she slightly tilted her head. While looking at Faith, Innocence took a deep breath and squatted down beside the bed. However, before she lowered herself, the door that she entered through vanished. They looked behind them to find a wall as in the rest of the room, and no door. While still looking at the wall, Innocence walked over to it. Faith, with doll in hand, followed and placed her hand on the wall. She started feeling the ridges of the cold, dark wall as if looking for a secret passage. Innocence turned, saw the hand of Faith, lowered her head slightly, and rubbed her forehead with the tips of her fingers. "Help me do this, Jesus. Help me do this," she whispered. Faith's attention moved to her. "Well, it looks like you're stuck here too. I don't exactly know where here is, but I'm working on it." Then Faith looked back at the wall and meticulously ran her hand across each crevice. "I don't even know where to start to look for a way out." She looked around the room and then looked back at Innocence. "To tell the truth, if I did find the door, I'm not sure if I would trust going through it." She looked back at the wall. "Stay here long enough and you'll see what I mean." Then Faith walked over to the bed and laid the doll down. She paused and turned to Innocence. "Anyway, welcome to our home. Let me introduce you." Innocence walked over to the bed. "This is Hadassah. She's sick. Don't ask me what it is." Then Faith very confidently added, "I'm working on that too." Innocence smiled, turned, and looked around. In the middle of the room, she saw an unfinished puzzle sitting on a table with a couple of chairs around it and a trunk under it. She walked over to the trunk. "What's this?" she asked as she was going to open it. Faith walked away from the doll, over to Innocence, and smiled. "This is the trunk of tomorrow." Then she pulled out a white feathery scarf and put it around her neck. She added, with a little bit of yesterday thrown in. She paused. "How do I look?" "You look adorable," replied Innocence as she went and sat on the edge of the bed. Faith followed but remained standing. "I look better than that. I look like a movie star. That's what I'm going to be, you know. One day, I'm going to be a famous actress, and you can say that you knew me when. Should I get your autograph now?" "Well, darling," as she flipped the scarf around her neck, "I'm late for my premiere." "No problem. I would hate to hold you up from your other fans. I'll get that autograph another time." Both Innocence and Faith laughed. While Faith smiled, she started to grab the scarf as to pull on it. However, before she could grasp it, it began to disappear. Her expression changed and became serious. "Someday," she said with a longing in her voice. As Faith looked over at the scarf that had reappeared in the trunk, she shook her head and said in a very sad tone, "But not today." She then looked at the wall where the door had stood. "Like I said, even if we find a way out of this place, who knows what lurks on the other side." She looked at Innocence. "It's as if this place has a mind of its own." She looked up at the clock on the wall. It read 12:25. She turned to Innocence. "Thank you for waking me. I've got to take her temperature." She walked over to the bed, pretended to get a thermometer, and took the doll's temperature. "How does it go? Do you feed a cold and starve a fever, or feed a fever and starve a cold?" Innocence walked over and sat on the bed, closed her eyes, and scratched her head and said, Feed a cold and starve a fever, I think." "Are you sure?" "I think so." She looked at the doll. "How's she doing?" Faith sighed. "She's running a slight fever." Innocence looked in the direction of where the puzzle was sitting. "Do you want to work on the puzzle?" She walked over to the table and stood looking at it. "Well, we can try," replied Faith as she walked over to the table. She slid into the chair and started working on the puzzle. "Oh yeah, before I forget, there's a piece missing." Innocence pulled out the other chair to sit down. However, before she could sit, it went back into its original place. Faith never looked up. "Welcome to the new zone. I can hear his voice now." Innocence slid into the chair and began to work on the puzzle too. Chapter 2, The Story. After working on the puzzle for a while, Faith was bored. "I am so ready to get out of here," she said as she sighed. How long have you been here?" 11 years, but it seems like we've been here forever." "Sorry, I forgot about Hadassah," said Innocence. She paused and said, "Oh yeah, that reminds me. Have you ever heard the story of Hadassah?" "Well, Esther. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. It's a story from the Bible." "So that's where she got the name. Anyway, tell me, because I love stories from the Bible. I was starting to memorize scriptures before I entered the new dimension." She cleared her throat and said, "I can do all things." Innocence smiled and said, "Through Christ who strengthens me." "I see that you memorize also." She turned, looked back around the room, and said, "I'll get back to it as soon as I'm out of here." "Well, the story goes something like this. Once upon a time, in a land not of make-believe, there lived a lovely and beautiful young Jewish woman who was cared for by a relative. His name was Mordecai. Wait, let me get this. Mordecai? Very good." She cleared her throat and said, "This beautiful young woman was loved by the king, so he made her queen. When she was made queen, she went by the name of Esther. However, Mordecai told her not to reveal that she was Jewish. One day, Mordecai refused to bow and pay homage, which is special honor or respect shown or expressed publicly, to a man named Haman. He refused because he was Jewish and would only bow down to God. Due to the fact that he refused, Haman got mad. So he decided to have all of the Jewish people throughout the kingdom, which would have included Esther, destroyed. He went to the king and talked him into creating a decree to do just that. When Mordecai heard about it, he was not happy, to say the least. He sent a message to her that more or less said that she had to take a stand for them all. However, in order for her to stand, she had to put her own life at risk, because there was a law that was in place that if you went before the king without having been called within a certain period of time, that you could be in a lot of trouble. was their way out of it. If the king held out the golden scepter, then you were home free. Okay, so what happened? Well, she made the decision to do it, to go before the king. In Esther's words, if I perish, I perish. Please tell me those weren't her last words. Innocence laughed. No, sweetheart, they were not. On that third day, she put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court. The king held out the golden scepter. The way that she decided to handle it was this. She asked the king and the guide to a banquet that she had prepared. At the banquet, the king told her that she could have almost anything and asked her what she needed. She told him that she would tell him the next day at another banquet that she was giving. Wait, why did she do that? I'm not positive, but I think that she got cold feet. Maybe. But she ended up exposing the guy, and the Jewish people were saved. Even though she got a little scared, she still did okay. Yeah, I guess so, because I guess the only thing that really mattered was that she did it. That's funny. What? The very thing that she believed that she could not do was the very thing that she had to do. I know, that one brave act altered the course of so many lives. With puzzle piece in hand, Faith looked at the wall and slowly stood. She walked over to it. She slowly extended her hand to touch the wall. At that moment, the puzzle piece was starting to disappear, and her hand caught her attention. Excuse me, oh gosh. With puzzle piece in hand, Faith looked at the wall and slowly stood. She walked over to it. She slowly extended her hand to touch the wall. At that moment, the puzzle piece that was starting to disappear in her hand caught her attention. Faith drew her hand back suddenly and finished seeing it disappear. They both looked and saw the puzzle go back to its original unfinished state. Then Faith looked up at the clock, which still read 12:25. I'm going to check on the patient now. She walked over to the bed. Chapter 3. Look. Innocence started putting the puzzle back together again. Faith walked over to the table and stood. I don't understand. Why are you going to try to put it together again? It's just going to keep disappearing. Sometimes you just know that certain things are meant to be solved. This puzzle happens to be one of them. Suit yourself. And Faith, as she walked back over to the doll. Suit yourself, said Faith as she walked back over to the doll. As she was caring for the doll, she asked, does heaven really exist? Does heaven really exist? Yes. How do you know for sure? The Bible says that it exists. Where is heaven? When Jesus left, it was a cloud that took him back. I believe that it is somewhere beyond or in the clouds. If you can't see heaven, then how do you know that it's there? Sometimes things are right in front of you. However, it is you who have to change in order to see it, responded Innocence. Faith turned to the doll. It's okay, honey. While placing her hand on the doll's forehead, she said, she's not doing very well today. She seems to feel warmer than usual. She is? Yeah. I'll be glad when she gets better. Faith rubbed her hair. Darn it, excuse me. Yeah, I'll be glad when she gets better. Faith rubbed the hair of the doll. If we're here, how do we get to heaven? I don't think that I've seen anyone leaving in any clouds. That's a good point. Well, each one of us has a body and an invisible part that you can't see. It is that invisible part that's capable of going to heaven right now. That invisible part is who we really are. She paused. That invisible part of Jesus is what went to paradise the first time. She paused. Both parts of Jesus are what went to heaven the second time, on or in the cloud. Faith walked over to Innocence and asked, "Are there houses in heaven?" Jesus said that there are many mansions in my Father's house, and before he left, he said that he was going to prepare a place for us. So the answer is yes. She walked over to the trunk of tomorrow and pulled out the scarf. Innocence stood. "You will be a star one day." Faith smiled. "I'm going to be a movie star one day." She confidently said, "I am." Then shook her head yes. When she did, part of the wall was eaten by a flash of light, which left behind the door, and a tiny, dim ball of light which was hidden in the trunk of tomorrow. Faith turned and gasped. "Oh, darn it. What did I say?" With amazement and joy, she pointed toward the door. "Look." I think I mistitled that last for this chapter. The title of it is Look. Darn it. Chapter 4, The Blue Cloth. They were both still looking at a door. Innocence said, "A door." With joy and amazement, Faith said, "I see it." They walked over to it. Faith looked down, saw a lock, and grabbed it. "It's locked." "Ew, and this is dirty." She wiped her hand off on her pants. However, the dirt didn't go onto her pants. It appeared back on the lock. She turned to Innocence while smiling and said, "Okay, where's the key?" Innocence pulled the lock and let go. She squatted and turned to Faith. "I don't have it." Faith said in a sad tone, What do you mean? What do you mean that you don't have it?" "I mean, I don't have it." Faith sighed and said, "Back to the drawing board." She paused. "Well, I'm going to go and see how she's doing. You look at it and see if you can figure out how to unlock it." "Well, let's see if we can find something to dust it off with first." Faith nodded. "Okay, I'm going to check on her first. You go ahead and see if you can find anything." Innocence looked around and saw this blue cloth in the trunk. She opened the trunk and found that the cloth was almost stuck to the bottom of the trunk. It was as if it were part of the foundation. She pulled the cloth out. She curiously said, "What is this?" She paused and said, "Damp." Faith turned around and smiled. "Oh, where did you find that?" She walked over to get it. She reached for the cloth. "Please, may I?" Innocence handed it to Faith. "Sure." Faith took the cloth. Innocence sat on the bed. Faith went with her but remained standing in front of her. She held the cloth in her right hand and raised her hand in an oath position and cleared her throat. "Let this meeting come to order. Repeat after me. I vow." Innocence smiling and said, "I vow." Faith whispered, "You have to raise your right hand." Innocence raised her right hand and said, "Oh, sorry. I vow, on this cloth, and no other, to always uphold, all of the rules of this club, from now on until, Faith said, "I say so." Then she smiled. Innocence smiled and said, "I say so." She laughed, and they both lowered their hands. Faith, with excitement, shook the cloth twice. "This is the cloth that bound our club together. When I was a little kid, we had this club." She sat beside Innocence. "No meetings could be held without it. Oh, and I remember," she smiled, "one Saturday, my mom had forgotten and put it in the washing machine just before one of our meetings." "Well, what happened?" Faith seriously said, "The meeting had to be canceled because..." She stood, pointed with her right finger, and shook her hand affirmatively twice and said, "We had rules." "Do you still uphold the rules?" She sat back down beside Innocence. "Oh, please, that was last year, and I was just 5. She smiled. "Do you want to know the name of our club?" Innocence smiled. What was it? I'll give you one guess. Innocence looked around. The trunk girls? Then she laughed. Faith jokingly hit Innocence. No, it was called. She paused and said, the club. She smiled. Innocence laughed. That was original in a way. Faith very happily said, we had a few members. She seriously said, and I was in charge, of course. She smiled. Of course, so tell me more about this club. Faith seriously said, well, we had 3 rules other than the fundamental of the blue cloth. Okay, the first one was no boys allowed. The second rule was that you must always wear the color blue on meeting days to match the blue cloth. And rule number 3 was the most important rule of all. You had to always eat peanut butter with jelly. Innocence and Faith both laughed. Yeah, how in the world could you have one without the other? Said Innocence. She laughed. Did everyone follow the rules? They had to, because those were. She paused and her eyes became wide and said, the rules. Well, I'll see if I can find something else to clean the lock. Okay, I'll check on her. The blue cloth disappeared and reappeared back in its original place in the trunk. Innocence watched the cloth disappear and noticed that it didn't even faze Faith of its disappearance. Faith walked over to Hadassah. Innocence got up and looked for something. Oh, I know what I can use. She used a white linen scarf that she was wearing as a belt. She went over to the lock. I have something. Okay, I'll help after I finish here. Okay, Innocence squatted down to get the dust off of the lock. She took the belt and wiped. The dust seemed to disappear. She looked at the lock. Okay, let me see what I have here. While getting the dust off, she said, okay, little lock, I don't want to get dust in the keyhole. She was wiping the dust off. Then she noticed some letters around the keyhole on the bottom of the lock. The letters were engraved before the lock was made. As she was wiping it, she said, what's this? The first letter became visible. She wiped another letter, and it also became visible. She wiped the remaining letters. She saw what was written on the lock. She stopped. She took a deep breath in and let it out. Then she very slowly looked up with a look of revelation and sadness on her face. She whispered very slowly, oh, so that's what it is.